Captain Marcus Wellington had served the royal house of Aldermere for 23 years, and, in all that time, he had never seen the palace corridors buzz with such tension. The ancient stone walls seemed to whisper secrets as servants hurried past with downcast eyes, their usual chatter replaced by nervous silence. Something was brewing in the heart of the kingdom, and Marcus could feel it in his bones. The morning sun streamed through the tall windows of the east wing, casting long shadows across the polished marble floors. Marcus walked his usual patrol route, his polished boots echoing rhythmically against the stone. His uniform, a deep navy blue with gold braiding that spoke of his rank, was immaculate as always. At 52, his hair had begun to show streaks of silver, but his posture remained as straight as the day he first swore his oath to protect the royal family. Princess Isabella Rose was only 8 years old, but she carried herself with a grace that reminded everyone she was born to rule. Her auburn hair caught the morning light as she sat in the palace library, surrounded by books that seemed far too advanced for her age. She had always been different from other children her age, preferring the company of books to toys, asking questions that made even the palace tutors pause and think. "Good morning, Princess," Marcus said with a respectful bow as he passed the library entrance during his rounds. Isabella looked up from her book about ancient kingdoms and smiled brightly. "Good morning, Captain Wellington. Did you know that Queen Adela the Brave once led her army into battle when she was only 16? Marcus paused, genuinely impressed by the child's knowledge. "I did not know that, Your Highness. You continue to amaze me with your learning." The princess beamed with pride, but her expression quickly grew more serious. "Captain, why has everyone been acting so strange lately? The maids whisper when they think I'm not listening, and cook barely speaks to anyone anymore." Before Marcus could answer, the sound of sharp heels clicking against marble announced the arrival of Lady Vivian Ashworth, the king's new wife of just 6 months. She had married King Edmund after the tragic death of Queen Catherine 2 years prior, and her integration into palace life had been anything but smooth. Lady Vivian was a striking woman in her early 40s, with perfectly styled blonde hair and clothes that spoke of wealth and ambition. She had come from a powerful noble family, and many whispered that her marriage to the king had more to do with political alliance than love. Her green eyes were sharp and calculating, and she carried herself with the confidence of someone who believed the world owed her something. "Princess Isabella," Lady Vivian said, her voice carrying an edge of authority that made Marcus's jaw tighten. "You should not be bothering the captain with your childish prattle. Surely you have lessons to attend?" Isabella's face flushed slightly, but she maintained her composure. "I have finished my morning studies, Lady Vivian. I was merely having a pleasant conversation with Captain Wellington." "How presumptuous of you to assume that the captain has time for pleasant conversation," Lady Vivian replied coldly. "Perhaps you have forgotten that this palace operates on discipline and order, not the whims of a child." Marcus felt his hands clench behind his back. In all his years of service, he had never heard anyone speak to Princess Isabella with such disrespect. The late Queen Catherine had been beloved by all, and Isabella was the very image of her mother, kind, intelligent, and genuinely caring about the people around her. "Actually, your ladyship," Marcus said carefully, Princess Isabella was sharing some fascinating historical knowledge. "Her education continues to be quite remarkable." Lady Vivian's eyes flashed with annoyance. "Captain Wellington, I was not addressing you. In the future, I would appreciate it if you would remember your place in this palace hierarchy." The tension in the room became thick enough to cut with a sword. Isabella looked between the two adults, her young mind trying to process the undercurrents of conflict she was witnessing. Marcus had to bite his tongue to prevent himself from saying something that could cost him his position. "Of course, your ladyship," he said through gritted teeth. "If you will excuse me, I must continue my rounds." As Marcus walked away, he could hear Lady Vivian's voice becoming sharper as she addressed Isabella. "Now then, Princess, we need to discuss some changes that will be taking place around here. Your father and I have been talking, and we believe it's time you learn some hard truths about royal responsibility." Marcus forced himself to keep walking, but every instinct in his body told him to turn around and intervene. He had sworn an oath to protect the royal family, and that included protecting Princess Isabella from anyone who might wish her harm, even if that person was now technically part of the family herself. The rest of the morning passed in a blur of routine duties, but Marcus found his thoughts constantly returning to the uncomfortable scene in the library. By afternoon, word had spread throughout the palace staff that Lady Vivian had been meeting privately with several members of the King's Council. The servants who had served the royal family for decades were beginning to express quiet concerns about the direction things were heading. Mrs. Margaret Thompson, the head housekeeper who had worked in the palace for over 30 years, approached Marcus during his afternoon break. Her usually cheerful demeanor was replaced by worry lines around her eyes. "Captain Wellington," she said in a low voice, glancing around to make sure they were not overheard. "I need to speak with you about something important. It's regarding Princess Isabella." Marcus set down his cup of tea and gave her his full attention. "What is it, Mrs. Thompson?" "Lady Vivian has been asking questions about the princess's daily routine, her tutors, even her personal servants. She wants to know everything about the child's schedule and who she spends time with. Yesterday, she actually suggested that some of the staff who had been caring for Isabella since birth might need to be reassigned." A cold chill ran down Marcus's spine. "Reassigned? What reason did she give?" "She claims that Princess Isabella has become too attached to certain servants and that it's not healthy for a future queen to have such emotional dependencies. She believes the princess needs to learn about proper royal detachment." Marcus felt his protective instincts flare. Princess Isabella's warm relationships with the palace staff were one of her most endearing qualities. The child genuinely cared about the people around her, from the lowest scullery maid to the highest court official. It was exactly the kind of quality that would make her a beloved queen someday. "Has the king approved these changes?" Marcus asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. Mrs. Thompson's expression grew even more troubled. "That's just it, Captain. His Majesty has been distant lately. Ever since his marriage to Lady Vivian, he seems to have lost interest in the day-to-day affairs of the palace. He spends most of his time locked away in his private study, and, when he does emerge, he appears to simply agree with whatever Lady Vivian suggests." Marcus knew that King Edmund had been struggling with grief and the overwhelming responsibilities of ruling alone after Queen Catherine's death. The man had loved his first wife deeply, and her loss had left him a shadow of his former self. Lady Vivian had arrived at a time when he was vulnerable, offering comfort and support that he desperately needed. But, was that support coming at the cost of his relationship with his daughter? "Has anyone tried to speak with His Majesty about these concerns?" Marcus asked. Lord Chancellor Harrison attempted to raise the subject last week, but Lady Vivian was present during the meeting. She managed to redirect the conversation toward other matters, and the issue was never properly addressed. "Captain, I fear that Princess Isabella is becoming isolated from everyone who truly cares about her welfare." That evening, as Marcus completed his final rounds of the day, he made sure to pass by Princess Isabella's chambers. Through the partially open door, he could see her sitting by her window, still reading by lamplight even though it was well past her usual bedtime. She looked smaller than her 8 years, and there was a sadness in her posture that broke his heart. He knocked gently on the doorframe. "Princess Isabella? Shouldn't you be preparing for sleep?" She looked up with tired eyes. "I couldn't sleep, Captain Wellington. I keep thinking about what Lady Vivian said today about changes coming to the palace. Do you think Father is unhappy with me?" Marcus entered the room and knelt down beside her chair so they could speak at eye level. "Princess, your father loves you more than anything in this world. Sometimes adults go through difficult periods where they don't show their feelings as clearly as they should, but that never means the love isn't there. But Lady Vivian says I need to learn royal detachment. She says I'm too emotional and that future queens must be stronger than that. Do you think she's right?" Marcus chose his words carefully, knowing that anything he said could potentially be repeated and cause problems. "Princess, the greatest queens in history were those who cared deeply about their people and their kingdom. Your mother, Queen Catherine, was beloved because she had such a kind heart. That's not weakness, that's strength of a different kind." Isabella's eyes brightened slightly. "You really think so?" "I know so, Your Highness. And, I promise you this, as long as I serve in this palace, I will always be here to protect you and to remind you of the truth about who you are." As Marcus left the princess's chambers that night, he had no idea that his words had been overheard by one of Lady Vivian's personal servants, who reported every detail of the conversation back to her mistress. The battle lines were being drawn, and soon Marcus would be forced to choose between his duty to the crown and his duty to protect an innocent child who was slowly being trapped in a web of palace politics and adult ambitions. 3 weeks had passed since Marcus's conversation with Mrs. Thompson, and the changes in the palace had become impossible to ignore. Princess Isabella's world was slowly shrinking as familiar faces disappeared from her daily routine. First, it was her beloved governess Miss Eleanor, who had taught her since she was 4 years old. Then, her favorite kitchen maid, Sarah, who used to sneak her extra honey cakes, was suddenly transferred to work in the far wing of the palace where Isabella never ventured. Lady Vivian's influence over King Edmund had grown stronger with each passing day. The king, once a vibrant and engaged father, now seemed to drift through the palace like a ghost of his former self. His eyes, which had once sparkled with pride when he looked at Isabella, now seemed clouded with confusion and exhaustion. Marcus watched with growing alarm as the man he had sworn to serve became increasingly dependent on his new wife's guidance in all matters. The morning of the incident that would change everything started like any other. Marcus was conducting his routine inspection of the palace security when he noticed unusual activity in the main courtyard. Lady Vivian's personal carriage was being prepared for departure, and several of her attendants were loading luggage with an urgency that seemed out of place for a simple day trip. "Quite a bit of preparation for a short journey," Marcus commented to Thomas, one of the stable hands who had worked at the palace for 15 years. Thomas glanced around nervously before responding. "Word is that Lady Vivian is planning to take the princess with her to visit her family estate for an extended stay. Some say it could be for several months." Marcus felt his blood run cold. "Has this been approved by His Majesty?" "That's what's strange, Captain. The king was in his study when the preparations began, but Lady Vivian spoke with him for only a few minutes before everything was set in motion. It all seems very sudden." Marcus's mind raced. An extended stay at Lady Vivian's family estate would effectively remove Princess Isabella from the protection of the palace guard and place her completely under Lady Vivian's control. Away from the familiar surroundings and loyal staff who cared for her well-being, the princess would be vulnerable in ways that made Marcus's stomach churn with worry. He made his way quickly to the king's private study, hoping to speak with His Majesty about these sudden travel plans. However, when he arrived, he found the door guarded by 2 of Lady Vivian's personal security men rather than the usual palace guards. "I need to speak with His Majesty," Marcus said firmly. "His Majesty is not receiving visitors at this time," one of the guards replied without making eye contact. "Lady Vivian has instructed that he is not to be disturbed for any reason." "I am the captain of the palace guard," Marcus said, his voice carrying the authority of his position. "I have the right to speak with the king about security matters concerning the royal family." "Not today, Captain," the second guard said, his hand moving noticeably closer to his sword. "Perhaps you should speak with Lady Vivian if you have concerns." Marcus realized that he was witnessing something unprecedented in his 23 years of service. The King of Aldermere was being kept from his own palace guards by his wife's personal security force. The implications were staggering and deeply troubling. He found Lady Vivian in the palace's grand salon, directing servants in packing what appeared to be several weeks' worth of Princess Isabella's belongings. She was dressed in traveling clothes and moved with the efficiency of someone executing a well-planned operation. "Lady Vivian," Marcus said, bowing respectfully despite his growing unease. "I understand that you are planning to travel with Princess Isabella. As captain of the palace guard, I need to discuss the security arrangements for such a journey." Lady Vivian turned to face him, her green eyes cold and calculating. "Captain Wellington, how thoughtful of you to be concerned about security. However, I can assure you that Princess Isabella will be perfectly safe at my family's estate. My own security personnel are more than capable of protecting her. With respect, your ladyship, it is my responsibility to ensure the safety of all members of the royal family. I would need to coordinate with your security team and possibly assign additional palace guards to accompany the princess." "That will not be necessary," Lady Vivian said sharply. "In fact, I believe it would be counterproductive. Princess Isabella has become far too dependent on familiar faces from the palace. This journey is partly intended to help her develop the independence and strength that will be required of a future queen. Marcus felt his diplomatic composure beginning to slip. Princess Isabella is 8 years old, your ladyship. She needs stability and familiar surroundings, not isolation from everyone who cares about her. Lady Vivian's expression hardened. Captain Wellington, I think you may be overstepping your boundaries. You are here to provide security, not to offer opinions on child-rearing or royal education. Perhaps your long service has made you forget the proper chain of command. My long service has taught me to recognize when a member of the royal family might be in danger, Marcus replied, his voice steady but firm. And I believe Princess Isabella would be safer remaining here in the palace, surrounded by people who have protected and cared for her since birth. How dare you suggest that I would put the princess in danger? Lady Vivian's voice rose, attracting the attention of several servants who quickly averted their eyes and tried to appear busy with their tasks. I am her stepmother, and I have only her best interests at heart. Your implications are completely inappropriate and border on insubordination. I meant no disrespect, your ladyship. I simply believe that any major changes to Princess Isabella's routine should be discussed thoroughly with His Majesty and the Palace Council before implementation. Lady Vivian stepped closer to Marcus, her voice dropping to a whisper that somehow seemed more threatening than her earlier outburst. Captain Wellington, let me make something very clear to you. I am now the queen of this realm, whether the formal coronation has taken place or not. My husband relies on my judgment in all matters concerning his daughter, and he has given his full approval for this journey. If you continue to question my decisions or authority, I will be forced to recommend to the king that you be relieved of your duties. The threat hung in the air between them like a sword ready to fall. Marcus realized that Lady Vivian was not merely trying to take Princess Isabella away for a few weeks, she was systematically removing every person who might stand between her and complete control over the child's life. His dismissal would eliminate the last major obstacle to her plans. I understand your position, your ladyship, Marcus said carefully. However, I must speak with His Majesty directly before Princess Isabella leaves the palace. It is a matter of protocol that I cannot ignore. His Majesty is indisposed and cannot be disturbed. He has a severe headache and is resting in his chambers. I'm sure you can appreciate that his health must come before administrative protocol. Marcus knew he was being outmaneuvered, but he also knew that he could not simply stand by and watch Princess Isabella be taken away without making every effort to protect her. Then, perhaps the journey could be postponed until His Majesty is feeling well enough to discuss the arrangements properly. Absolutely not. The travel plans have been finalized, and my family is expecting us. Princess Isabella needs to learn that royal duties do not wait for personal convenience or the comfort of familiar surroundings. As if summoned by the mention of her name, Princess Isabella appeared at the entrance to the salon. She was dressed in traveling clothes that seemed too formal for her small frame, and her usually bright eyes were red-rimmed as if she had been crying. Lady Vivian, the princess said quietly, I've finished packing my books as you requested. Must I really leave all my favorites behind? Some of them were gifts from my mother. Lady Vivian's expression softened artificially as she turned to address the child. Princess Isabella, we've discussed this. You must learn to let go of childish attachments to material possessions. A true queen finds strength within herself, not in sentimental objects from the past. Marcus watched as Princess Isabella's small shoulders sagged with defeat. The child was clearly unhappy about the upcoming journey, but she was too well-mannered and properly raised to argue with an adult, especially one who held such authority over her life. Your Highness, Marcus said gently, are you looking forward to seeing Lady Vivian's family estate? Isabella looked uncertainly between Marcus and Lady Vivian before answering. I'm sure it will be very educational, Captain Wellington. Lady Vivian says I need to learn about different ways of life if I'm going to be a good queen someday. That's very wise thinking, Princess. And how long will you be away from the palace? Lady Vivian hasn't told me yet. She says it depends on how quickly I learn the lessons she wants to teach me. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. The vague timeline suggested that this journey might be indefinite, with Princess Isabella's return dependent on her compliance with Lady Vivian's demands. It was emotional manipulation disguised as education, and it was being directed at a vulnerable 8-year-old child. Well, Princess, I hope you have a safe journey. Please remember that you always have friends here at the palace who care about you and will be eager for your return. Lady Vivian's eyes flashed with anger at Marcus's words, but she maintained her artificial smile. How thoughtful, Captain. However, I think it would be better for Princess Isabella to focus on her future rather than dwelling on the past. Now, Princess, please go and say goodbye to your father. We'll be leaving within the hour. As Princess Isabella left the salon, Marcus made one final attempt to delay what he was beginning to see as essentially a kidnapping disguised as family travel. Lady Vivian, I must insist on speaking with His Majesty before the princess leaves the palace. As captain of the palace guard, I have both the right and the responsibility to ensure that his orders regarding his daughter's safety are clearly understood. Captain Wellington, Lady Vivian said with icy finality, I am beginning to think that your emotional attachment to Princess Isabella is clouding your professional judgment. Perhaps it's time to consider whether someone with more objectivity might be better suited to your position. The gauntlet had been thrown down. Marcus realized that Lady Vivian was prepared to have him dismissed rather than allow him to interfere with her plans. But he also realized that his oath to protect the royal family meant more to him than his position or his personal safety. If protecting Princess Isabella meant sacrificing his career, then that was a price he was willing to pay. The palace corridors had never felt more like a labyrinth to Marcus as he made his way toward the king's private chambers. Lady Vivian's guards still stood at the study door, but Marcus knew there had to be another way to reach His Majesty. 23 years of service had taught him every secret passage, every servant's entrance, and every route through the ancient building that tourists and even most residents never discovered. He found Mrs. Thompson in the kitchen, supervising the preparation of what appeared to be a traveling meal for Princess Isabella's journey. Her usually steady hands were trembling slightly as she arranged small sandwiches in a basket, and her eyes were rimmed with unshed tears. Mrs. Thompson, Marcus said quietly, drawing her aside. I need your help with something urgent. Is there any way to reach the king without going through Lady Vivian's guards? The elderly housekeeper looked around nervously before nodding. There's the old servant's stairway that connects to His Majesty's private chambers. It hasn't been used in years, but the door should still be unlocked. Queen Catherine used to use it sometimes when she wanted to surprise the king with late-night visits during their courtship. Can you show me? Marcus asked. Captain, if Lady Vivian discovers that we helped you reach the king against her wishes, we could all lose our positions. Some of us have families to support and nowhere else to go. Marcus placed a gentle hand on the woman's shoulder. Mrs. Thompson, I understand your fears, and I would never ask you to risk your livelihood lightly. But I believe Princess Isabella is in real danger, and her father may be the only person who can protect her. Sometimes we have to choose between our jobs and our consciences. Mrs. Thompson studied Marcus's face for a long moment, seeing in his eyes the same genuine care for Princess Isabella that had motivated her own decades of loyal service to the royal family. Finally, she nodded. Follow me, Captain. But we must be very careful. The servants' stairway was narrow and dusty, clearly unused for months. As they climbed the wooden steps, Mrs. Thompson whispered, His Majesty has been different since Queen Catherine's death, but this past month has been particularly troubling. He barely eats, rarely leaves his chambers, and seems to agree with everything Lady Vivian suggests without really listening to what she's saying. Has anyone else tried to reach him? Marcus asked. Lord Chancellor Harrison attempted to schedule a private audience last week, but Lady Vivian insisted on being present for all official business. She claims the king becomes too agitated when discussing state matters alone and that her presence helps keep him calm. They reached the top of the stairway, where a small door led directly into the king's private sitting room. Mrs. Thompson knocked gently and called out, Your Majesty? It's Mrs. Thompson. I've brought Captain Wellington to see you. There was a long pause before they heard movement from within the room. When the door opened, Marcus was shocked by the king's appearance. Edmund had always been a robust man with a commanding presence, but the figure before them seemed to have aged 10 years in the past few months. His hair was disheveled, his clothes wrinkled, and his eyes held the vacant look of someone who was struggling to focus on the present moment.
"Mrs. Thompson?"
"Captain Wellington," the king said, his voice weak and confused.
"What are you doing here?" "Lady Vivian said I wasn't supposed to receive any visitors today. She said I needed to rest before Isabella's journey."
Marcus stepped forward and bowed respectfully. "Your Majesty, I apologize for the unusual circumstances of this visit, but I need to speak with you urgently about Princess Isabella's travel plans. As captain of the palace guard, I have concerns about her safety that require your immediate attention." King Edmund rubbed his temples as if trying to clear his thoughts.
"Travel plans?"
"Yes, Vivian mentioned something about visiting her family estate. She said it would be good for Isabella's education."
I agreed to it, didn't I? Everything seems so foggy lately."
Marcus exchanged a worried glance with Mrs. Thompson. The king's condition was clearly worse than anyone had realized.
"Your Majesty, when did you last have a proper meal or a full night's sleep?"
"I'm not sure," the king admitted.
"Vivian has been taking care of everything for me.
She says I need to focus on regaining my strength and not worry about the day-to-day affairs of the palace.
She's been very helpful."
"Your Majesty," Marcus said gently but urgently, "I believe Princess Isabella may be in danger. Lady Vivian is planning to take her away from the palace for an indefinite period, away from everyone who has cared for her since birth. She's dismissed the princess's governess, reassigned her favorite servants, and now she wants to isolate her completely from her support system." King Edmund's eyes seemed to struggle to focus on Marcus's words.
"Danger? No, that can't be right. Vivian loves Isabella.
She's always telling me how much she wants to help her become a strong, independent princess. She says Isabella has become too emotional, too dependent on others."
"Your Majesty, Princess Isabella is 8 years old.
She needs love and stability, not isolation and emotional manipulation. Your daughter is a remarkable child with a kind heart and a brilliant mind.
Those qualities should be nurtured, not crushed in the name of royal strength."
For a moment, something flickered in the king's eyes, a glimpse of the protective father he had once been.
"Isabella is remarkable, isn't she?
She reminds me so much of her mother.
Catherine always said that Isabella would be an extraordinary queen because she genuinely cares about people."
"Exactly, Your Majesty. Queen Catherine would never have wanted her daughter to be taught that caring for others is weakness. She would have wanted Isabella to be surrounded by love and support, especially during these formative years."
Mrs. Thompson stepped forward.
"Your Majesty, if I may speak plainly, the entire palace staff is concerned about Princess Isabella's welfare. We've watched her become more withdrawn and sad with each passing week. The child barely smiles anymore, and she's lost weight because she's too upset to eat properly." King Edmund's hand went to his chest as if he was experiencing physical pain.
"She's not smiling? My Isabella always smiled."
"Catherine used to say her smile could light up the darkest room. That smile is still there, Your Majesty, but it's being slowly extinguished by people who don't understand how precious it is," Marcus said. "Princess Isabella needs her father to protect her, to ensure that she's surrounded by people who love her for who she is, not people who want to change her into something else." Suddenly, they heard voices in the hallway outside the king's chambers. Lady Vivian's sharp tone was unmistakable as she spoke to someone about finalizing the travel preparations.
Time was running out.
"Your Majesty," Marcus said urgently, "Lady Vivian plans to leave with Princess Isabella within the hour. Once they're at her family estate, you may not see your daughter for months."
"Is that really what you want?"
King Edmund's expression began to clear as if fog was lifting from his mind.
"Months? She said it would be a brief visit. She said."
He paused, and, for the first time in their conversation, his voice carried a note of anger. "She's been giving me medicine to help me sleep, to calm my nerves. But, lately, I feel more confused than calm.
More distant from everything that matters to me."
Mrs. Thompson and Marcus exchanged alarmed looks. The implications of what the king was suggesting were serious and disturbing.
Your Majesty, Marcus said carefully, perhaps you should stop taking that medicine for a few days and see how you feel. In the meantime, what would you like me to do about Princess Isabella's travel plans?
The king stood up straighter, and, for a moment, Marcus could see glimpses of the strong ruler he had once been.
I want to see my daughter.
I want to speak with her before any decisions are made about her future. And I want you to make sure she's safe, Captain.
That's an order. Of course, Your Majesty.
But you should know that Lady Vivian has threatened to have me dismissed if I continue to interfere with her plans. King Edmund's eyes flashed with something that looked like his old spirit returning. Captain Wellington, you have served my family with honor and loyalty for over 20 years. No one dismisses you except me, and I have no intention of doing so. In fact, I'm beginning to think I need people around me who aren't afraid to tell me the truth, even when it's difficult to hear. The voices in the hallway were getting closer. Marcus knew they had only moments before Lady Vivian would discover their meeting. Your Majesty, if you're going to intervene, it needs to happen now. The carriage is being prepared, and Princess Isabella is already dressed for travel. King Edmund straightened his clothes and ran his hands through his hair, trying to restore some semblance of royal dignity to his appearance. Then, let's go, Captain. It's time I remembered what it means to be a father and a king. As they prepared to leave the king's chambers, Marcus felt a surge of hope for the first time in weeks. But he also knew that confronting Lady Vivian would be dangerous, not just for his career, but potentially for Princess Isabella's future relationship with her father. The next few minutes would determine whether the royal family could be healed or whether it would be torn apart forever. The battle for Princess Isabella's future was about to begin, and Marcus knew that everything he had worked for and believed in would be put to the ultimate test. The main courtyard of the palace had been transformed into a scene of organized chaos. Lady Vivian's ornate carriage stood ready, its dark blue exterior gleaming in the afternoon sun while her personal servants loaded the final pieces of luggage. Princess Isabella stood beside the carriage steps, looking impossibly small in her formal traveling dress, her favorite doll clutched tightly in her arms despite Lady Vivian's earlier insistence that such toys were beneath the dignity of a future queen. Lady Vivian herself was directing the final preparations with military precision, her voice sharp as she ordered the servants to hurry their work. She had changed into an elaborate traveling ensemble that spoke of wealth and authority, and her posture radiated the confidence of someone who believed her victory was assured. Marcus walked slightly behind King Edmund as they approached the courtyard, ready to step forward if needed but allowing His Majesty to take the lead. The king's stride had grown stronger with each step away from his chambers, as if physical distance from his private quarters was helping to clear his mind of whatever fog had been clouding his judgment for the past weeks. Lady Vivian, King Edmund called out, his voice carrying more authority than it had in months. I need to speak with you about these travel plans. Lady Vivian turned with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Edmund, darling, you should be resting in your chambers. I told you that I would handle all the arrangements for Isabella's educational journey. There's no need for you to concern yourself with these details. I am the king, Edmund said firmly, and Isabella is my daughter. I think it's entirely appropriate for me to concern myself with her welfare. Something flickered across Lady Vivian's face, a flash of annoyance that she quickly covered with a look of gentle concern. Of course, dear. I simply meant that you've been feeling unwell lately, and I didn't want you to strain yourself unnecessarily. Everything has been arranged exactly as we discussed. That's interesting, King Edmund said, moving closer to his daughter, because I don't remember discussing an indefinite stay at your family estate. I don't remember agreeing to send Isabella away from everyone she knows and loves for months at a time. Princess Isabella looked up at her father with hope blooming in her eyes. Father? Are you saying I might not have to go away? Lady Vivian stepped quickly between the king and Princess Isabella, her smile becoming more strained. Edmund, we did discuss this, remember? Yesterday evening when you were feeling so tired and overwhelmed. You agreed that Isabella needed to learn independence and strength, and that my family's estate would provide the perfect environment for such education. Yesterday evening I was barely coherent, King Edmund replied, his voice growing stronger with each word. I've been taking the medicine you've been giving me to help with my grief, but lately, it's been making me feel more confused than comforted.
I think it's time I stopped relying on chemical solutions and started facing my responsibilities as a father.
Marcus watched Lady Vivian's face carefully, noting the way her jaw tightened at the king's words. She was clearly not prepared for this level of resistance, and her carefully laid plans were beginning to unravel. "Edmund, you're obviously still not feeling well," Lady Vivian said, her voice taking on a slightly condescending tone. "Perhaps you should return to your chambers and rest while I take care of Isabella's departure."
"We can discuss this properly when you're feeling more like yourself."
"I am feeling more like myself than I have in weeks," the king replied. "And what I'm feeling is that my daughter should not be taken away from her home, her friends, and everyone who loves her in the name of some harsh educational philosophy." Princess Isabella stepped forward, her small voice carrying clearly across the courtyard.
"Father, I don't want to go away from the palace.
I want to stay here with you and Captain Wellington and Mrs. Thompson and everyone else who cares about me."
Lady Vivian says I.